Hello and welcome to this deep dive. Thanks for joining us here at Westferry Times today. We're taking a critical look at some recent events around aid distribution in Gaza. And this is all based entirely on the source material you've shared with us. Specifically, it's a briefing that details a particular incident, but also gives the broader context surrounding it. So, our mission today. Basically, to dive into your material, pull out the most important insights we can find about this incident, the ongoing crisis, and really help you understand the different facets presented there. And helping us synthesize all this complex information, sort of connect the dots as laid out in your source, is our expert analyst. Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, it's definitely a challenging subject, but the material you've provided, it gives a very focused look, I think, at these specific events and, well, their wider implications as the briefing outlines them.
Okay, great. Let's unpack this then. Your source seems to kick things off by focusing on one core event. That's an incident at an aid distribution site in Rafah, June 1st, 2025. And the briefing notes this site, it's operated by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF.
That's right, GHF. And the source does state that this organization is backed by the U.S. and Israel.
Okay.
And then right away, the briefing presents the account from the Gaza Health Ministry. What the source really emphasizes there is the reported human cost. Over 30 Palestinians killed, around 170 injured. And this account, as it's presented in your material, claims Israeli forces allegedly opened fire on civilians who were there just collecting aid.
Right, a very stark account. But the source, it doesn't just leave it there, does it? It gives the other side. It presents the counter perspective directly from the IDF.
Exactly.
According to your briefing, the IDF flatly denied targeting civilians. Their statement, at least as cited in the source, is that they only fired warning shots. And this was apparently to deter individuals they described as, quote, suspicious. The material also mentions that the IDF released some drone footage. Unverified footage, the source notes, claiming it showed Hamas militants firing at civilians during the same incident.
Yeah, and it's really striking, isn't it, how the source just lays out these two, dramatically different accounts of the exact same event. What becomes really clear reading your material is how critical that sort of battle over the narrative is in a situation like this.
Definitely.
So the briefing, by putting these conflicting claims right next to each other, it highlights less about verifying the absolute truth in that moment, and more about how each side, as described in your source, uses information, how they frame the event to potentially influence understanding, influence the reaction.
That makes sense. So moving beyond just the immediate incident details, the source connects this event pretty quickly to the bigger picture, right? The broader humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
It does.
It notes Gaza has been under an Israeli blockade since March 2nd. Leading directly, according to this material, to just extreme food scarcity across the whole territory.
And what the source highlights about the aid distribution itself, the challenges there, that's equally critical. It includes some specific criticism aimed at the GHF's methods.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, it states that their setup requires civilians to travel, long distances through areas described as dangerous just to get to the aid pickup point.
Wow.
So this suggests, as it's presented in the briefing, that the distribution method itself might actually be contributing to the danger people face.
Right. And I see the material also brings in condemnation from some humanitarian organizations, Doctors Without Borders, the UN.
Yes, exactly. Your source notes they're emphasizing this urgent need to safely scale up food access, and they express significant concerns about these dangerous conditions people are forced into at the distribution sites. And if we connect these points, the briefing clearly flags concerns about what it actually terms the militarization of aid.
Militarization of aid? What does that mean in this context?
Well, as described in your source, it refers to how these aid distribution points, or maybe the whole process, they become sort of integrated into active conflict zones, which obviously directly impacts the safety of civilians trying to get help, and also the overall effectiveness of the humanitarian effort itself. It's not just about the logistics of getting aid in.
It's about the conditions when they try to get it out.
Precisely. The conditions under which it has to be received.
Okay, so given all that, the incident, the context, how does your source describe the international reaction to this specific June 1st event?
Well, the material notes there's been pretty widespread condemnation. More specifically, your source points to reactions like U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff calling the incident a setback to peace efforts.
Setback.
Yeah, and that particular reaction, as it's presented in the briefing, it shows how a specific, quite localized event can be seen, at least by some actors mentioned in the source, as directly impacting those broader diplomatic processes and goals. It ripples outwards.
Right. And speaking of diplomacy, your source also touches on the state of ceasefire negotiations.
It does. Describes them as stalled, basically.
Followed, okay. Mediated by the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, is that right?
That's what the source says, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the briefing explains the reason for that stall, citing Hamas's request for amendments to the U.S.-backed proposal.
Amendments. And what was the issue there?
Well, what the source details is that the U.S. envoy, as presented in the material, deemed these proposed amendments unacceptable. So seeing those specific sticking points laid out in your material, it gives us a clearer picture of the immediate obstacles in those really critical negotiations.
Yeah, the specific hurdles. The source also provides that crucial background context, doesn't it, about the ongoing conflict overall, stating it began after the Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And it mentions the scale, too. The reported Palestinian deaths, noted as over 54,000, and just the widespread destruction in Gaza. It really paints a stark backdrop.
It does. And importantly, for getting a fuller picture from the source, it includes Israel's counterarguments, too.
Okay, like what?
Citing their claims that Hamas misappropriates aid and also their denial of responsibility for the famine conditions that are being described.
Right.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, these really complex, often totally conflicting claims about responsibility, about the role of aid, the origins of the crisis, they are, as presented right there in your material, absolutely central to the broader conflict dynamics. The briefing makes it very clear these points of contention run incredibly deep.
Okay, so looking ahead then, does your source suggest any steps, anything that could potentially be taken to alleviate this humanitarian crisis?
Yes, the proposals that are detailed in your source, they focus heavily on the need for a concerted effort, an effort to make aid distribution both safe and effective.
Safe and effective makes sense.
Which includes the necessity, as suggested by the briefing, to reevaluate the existing methods, like those used by the GHF, and critically, to ensure aid actually reaches those who need it without exposing them to further danger.
That seems key.
Yeah, this emphasis in the source really highlights the immense practical challenges of delivering help in an active war zone, and the risks civilians face just trying to survive.
And I assume diplomacy is mentioned too.
Absolutely. The source also points to the fundamental necessity of renewed diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a lasting ceasefire. That's presented as a crucial step.
Right, a ceasefire being perhaps the ultimate solution here. Okay, so we've taken quite a deep dive into your source material today. We've unpacked the specifics of that Rafah incident, placed it in the context of the broader humanitarian crisis described in the briefing, looked at the international reactions presented, and explored some potential steps forward suggested by the material itself.
Yeah, and perhaps the starkest takeaway, for me at least, reading your source, is the reality it presents. That even something as essential as distributing humanitarian aid, it can become a point of intense conflict and real danger, as this particular incident really seems to highlight.
It certainly does. So here's maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to consider based on the source material we've explored together today. In a situation that's marked by such conflicting accounts and just immense human need, how do these different perspectives, the ones presented right here in the source, how do they shape not only the immediate response, but also the potential path forward, both for practical aid delivery and for that longer-term diplomacy we talked about? Something to mull over. Thank you so much for sharing the material that allowed us to explore these incredibly complex issues.
Yes, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We really encourage you to continue exploring, continue staying informed on these challenging, important topics. Until next time here on Westferry Times, take care.